Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Christy Funk, and it's my privilege to welcome you all to today's Startup NASA Feature Series presentation. We really look forward to hearing from Rosotics and hope that you enjoy their talk. But before we get started, I would like to point out that your microphones will be muted throughout the presentation. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box in the lower right corner of your screen, and we will answer them during the Q&A session at the end. So this monthly series provides an opportunity for NASA tech-inspired startup companies to share their stories, including how they got involved with NASA and where they are currently in the development of their new product or service. NASA's Tech Transfer Program ensures that innovations developed for exploration and discovery are broadly available to the public. And we have since expanded that or augmented that mission to include our Tech Transfer Expansion Program. And in that program, we focus on entrepreneurial innovation and creating partnerships to help accelerate commercialization. So we invite you to visit the NASA Tech Transfer website for more information on available licensing opportunities and other initiatives. And definitely stay tuned for registration information for our next Startup Series presentation featuring Canopy Aerospace on April 13th. It is now my pleasure to introduce your Rosotics speakers, Christian LaRosa and Austin Thurman. Christian is an FAA licensed remote pilot with a background in aerospace engineering and biologically inspired engineering. He has previously served on a student-led effort to develop a pulsed plasma thruster under support from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Raytheon. Christian also participated in NASA's space proposal writing experience, where he developed a new method of lunar seismic data collection with the Marshall Space Flight Center. He carries intern experience with the Port of Tampa Bay and international logistics, and his contribution is in leading the team in line with a technically complex vision. Austin's background is primarily in the finance and supply chain sectors, believing in scaling the most powerful ideas from concept to market. He values integrity and razor-sharp attention to detail. And he has experience in accounting and financial planning, having worked in the past analyzing and organizing financial records for a restaurant corporation, as well as working at a financial planning firm. And through studies in both finance and supply chain, Austin is passionate about propelling Rosotics into being a global force of manufacturing. Exhilarated by the vast applications of swarm manufacturing, he serves in upper management at Rosotics. So with that, I'd like to welcome Christian and Austin to share about their journey. And again, we'll keep an eye on the chat box and open up for questions at the end of their presentation. Over to you, Christian and Austin.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. We're definitely honored and excited to be here. And really, we're just pumped to share something that we are both really excited about. Hopefully, you all can share that sentiment with us after the hour. So, yeah.
Of course, yeah. We're excited to talk today. Yes. Ready?
Yep, sure.
Yeah, so Rosotics is all about the problem that today metal additive manufacturing is very incredibly hard to do at the large scale. You know, we have these amazing companies who have innovated for parts and components, but they're really
So, the primary thing we're kind of looking at is, everyone kind of talks about additive manufacturing being the future of manufacturing, but we have yet to kind of see that break through. And one of the primary things that we see as holding that back is the fact that you can't really print large structures yet. There's a lot of great companies that work on pretty finite parts, but there's still kind of nothing as far as large scale manufacturing. And so there's really two ways you can go about this. One of them is kind of create giant 3D printers, which you kind of have seen Relativity do, which is great, but we kind of believe at some point the printers can't keep getting bigger. And so the other route you can take is finding out how to decentralize the process of printing and kind of go the opposite direction. How small can we get? And can we find a way to incorporate swarm technology on the stance of manufacturing? It's kind of something that you've always seen in kind of futuristic TV shows or movies, but now we're kind of getting to a point where this technology is actually possible. And so this whole thing was pretty much inspired by nature. You know, when we're trying to think of, okay, well, A, is this even possible to swarm manufacture? And if you look at ants and bees, some kind of nature's great producers, you always see them working together and able to create these pretty intricate structures. So that kind of birthed our inspiration for this company, but also for specifically what we call Project Honeycomb, which is kind of how we're starting to implement this technology. And we're going to share that as we move forward today.
Right. Yeah. So the thing about heavy industry is that it powers almost every industry. You know, we're looking at an aerospace industry that is exploding right now. And not only that, the energy sector, the marine sector, all of these areas are touched by heavy industry in one way or another. And yeah, service contracting forms a lot of these industries. And a lot of that is based on the tool sets that we have and are able to use to actually manufacture at the large scale. So, like Austin said, you really could go one of two ways here. You could build the largest 3D printer, or you could go the opposite direction and build the smallest 3D printer and mobilize that at scale. So around 2017, we really started to look at the example of nature and how bees and ants work to produce. And the main difference you notice is that the process is distributed. It's not happening from one point source. So we started to ask ourselves, how do we make manufacturing possible from not one but multiple point sources? And we drew up storyboards for that, what that could potentially look like. And yeah, you really start to break out the problem by distribution, and you can do things a lot quicker and a lot easier. So yeah, from there, we kind of grew it into a concept of sorts where you really want to go airborne. And you want to go airborne because of the verticality of that. And Austin, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So kind of the idea is, okay, if we're not going to be moving a part inside of a printer anymore, then we got to move the printer around the part. So initially you can think about kind of grounded movement. So say, for example, you built some sort of a rover or a drone that had 3D printing capability on the ground. That could be good, but you really miss out on the verticality that some industries require, like energy with wind turbines or aerospace with kind of the shells of jets. So the idea is that by distributing 3D printing and kind of incorporating swarm technology with the use of airborne drones, you could really get that verticality that would allow you to kind of blow the door open in terms of large scale manufacturing. So before the drone as well, there's also the incorporation of a new type of printing we were looking at called rapid induction printing. And this is really what's going to allow this type of manufacturing to happen. Because today, almost all 3D manufacturing is done with a laser. But there's a lot of problems with lasers. One of them just being they're inherently inefficient and they use an immense amount of energy and produce so much heat that the implementation of 3D printing is just difficult to begin with. And especially if you're talking about the FAA, you would never be able to get a laser in the air. So that required us to kind of go back and say, okay, well, first of all, before we can even put 3D printing technology on drones, we have to get a new process to be able to do that. That led us to rapid induction printing, which Christian will go into.
Exactly, yeah. So here in these sketches, this was the earliest iteration of the idea of truly decentralized manufacturing. And yeah, we started out designing a drone from the perspective of collaborating within a swarm of other drones to do the task of metal 3D printing. And at first, we were looking at many different ways that this could potentially be done. in some cases, a robotic arm on the drone. And yeah, from there, we really expanded the idea out to the point where the drones are not just, deploying from a fixed system, but a mobile system, even a vehicle, and doing this kind of work out in the field. You want to be able to do this kind of work on location because it removes a lot of the hassle of transport and logistics that surround these industries. So from that concept art, we really were sold we were just sold on the idea that you want to be able to put this system in the air and distribute it and do it on location. This is a fundamental barrier to making this a reality that has to be solved. You have to take the system airborne. And yeah, for that to happen, you needed several breakthroughs to occur. The first of which, you need very high energy efficiency on a process level. Like we said before, most of the metal additive industry right now is heavily reliant. Yeah, one of the great examples is exactly the fact that the industry relies on lasers predominantly, or even electron beams, which are very energy inefficient. You're looking at a significant amount of the power wasted in just the use of a laser or an electron beam. So in order to fix that problem, you need an entirely new approach to the metal additive idea. And not only that, you have to do it in a way that the performance is not, reduced in any such way. It has to be equal or better in performance than the traditional approach. And not only that, yeah, in order for this to work, you need the drone to be very lightweight. And not only that, it has to be fully automated. So in order to make this work, we needed a new approach, a new process of metal additive that would deliver that same performance using, a fraction of the power you would normally, put in. So what we ended up doing was we invented an entirely new approach to metal additive manufacturing.
Right. So as you can see here, what I mentioned a little earlier, this is what we call rapid induction printing, which uses the process of induction versus a laser or electron beam. Now, this does a ton of things that would really open a lot of doors, and most importantly, improving energy efficiency, material efficiency, even the amount of time it takes to manufacture. There's so many benefits that comes from this process. It's almost shocking that this hasn't been tried yet. And the best thing for us really is that this is going to work in open air, which is a big deal if you talk about manufacturing on site, especially if you're going to be close to residential areas, if you're going to be in tighter spaces. The fact that we can work in open air really allows for implementation to be much less of a hassle than it is today. So, a lot of companies that we've talked to today have had a lot of frustrations when it comes to implementing 3D printers because, first of all, you have to have the space to implement it. And then from there, you have to have an immense amount of energy supply to power lasers and electron beams. And then finally, what we've heard is worst of all, you have to get all the heat out of there that you just built up. And so a lot of these companies end up spending so much time and money that can completely be avoided if you start using a new process, which we think is going to be rapid induction printing.
Exactly. And the amazing thing about this process is that you're able to deliver that same heat that the laser would deliver directly from the energy that would power that laser. And induction, in my opinion, is one of those things that is a perfect match for, metal 3D printing. And yeah, you want to be able to eliminate the laser from the process and do that same process without sacrificing any of the quality. So in order to make that work, we turned to NASA's technology transfer program and found that yeah, being able to monitor that process while it's happening and even correct mistakes as they are being made, that is everything in order to make this work. You need to be able to eliminate the need for post-processing. And yeah, we found NASA had developed several innovations in that space that yeah, you want to be able to implement an approach that is not reliant on that same fundamental barrier that is post-processing if you want to do it on location.
Right. Stay on this for a second. So another thing that a lot of people and companies we've talked to just about frustrations when it comes to 3D printing, a couple people have told us that they hate the fact that they can't tell if there's a problem happening until it's all said and done, and then they have to go and do an entirely new print. And if there's a way to monitor the quality as the print is being made, then it would just be much better overall for obvious reasons. And so this is especially true if we're going to very, high quality industries such as aerospace and energy, where you can't afford mistakes. So in the middle of a print, to be able to monitor exactly the track you're going and making sure everything is working as it should is largely important to the overall success and quality management of, pretty high caliber products. So this is definitely a great partnership with NASA that has helped us get to this point.
Of course, yeah. So in order to make this idea work of truly decentralized manufacturing, you need the two components we've discussed. You need that process innovation, which is rapid induction, and you need the drone. So being able to crack the process side first, we think was very important for the overall long-term vision. And obviously the next step would be, the fully autonomous drone.
Right. So the idea is that, if we're talking milestones, the first one is obviously to nail down rapid induction, which is our new process, right? Because that alone is already going to be a big deal for additive manufacturing. So focusing on that first before we try to put anything in the air and create a drone, because that's a separate thing. But once we nail down that process, there's already so much you could do with that. And then the next step would be, okay, let's now develop our drone, put it together, and then now you have a pretty amazing technology. So right now we are in the phase of developing that rapid induction process. And then in the coming months and quarters, we hope to be focusing more so on the stinger and then figuring out how to perfectly mend those together in a repeatable and effective process for all the industries that we've mentioned so far.
Of course. So the drone ultimately will utilize this process that we've developed in an FAA compliant drone designed to operate as part of a larger swarm. So in order to make that work, we found some very unique ways to default, the actual print element back to physics and really get it at a stable point. And the stability is very important. Yeah, you want to be able to not only integrate this into a drone, but be able to do that in a way that is stable. So yeah, okay, this is all great, but what has been proven now already? And one of the earliest things we wanted to answer was, could this be done from an entirely mobile, untethered platform? So the first thing we really sought out to solve is, yeah, getting that on a fully mobile platform. So in 2020, we built a prototype modeled after a spider or a scorpion that we called Crawler. And this was really about demonstrating performance metal 3D printing from an entirely mobile, self-contained platform. And not only,
And so from this as well, Obviously, we started with a ground prototype because if you crash an airborne prototype, it's just a mess and you lose all the money. But being able to bootstrap a ground prototype was really great for us because we could kind of, put concept to reality. And obviously on the left, you can see that there we utilized an extremely small 3D printing arm that then was used as a laser. But since things have changed in the past 2 years since 2020. But as a starting point, this really let us see, okay, this can be done. It is possible. It's there. So moving along from this, we went into kind of the development of this with the bootstrap money that we had, and all the different components that you can see are being developed here. And then you put all these together, you start implementing some of the wiring technology, if you want to go into that.
Yeah, and that's my dog for scale. It was a pretty large machine, roughly about 100-pound mechanized robot. And yeah, we were able to get this done pretty capital efficient and be able to demonstrate that ultimately, yeah, this to date is the only fully mechanized metal 3D printer that we know of. And not only that, it's able to do the same performance metal 3D printing that you'd come to expect, from a multi-million-dollar machine. And yeah,
So kind of what we decided here is that, look, a ground prototype is great, but really the important kind of structures are going to need that verticality. So obviously it says one of one, and we intend it to be that way unless there's a point where we think maybe rover, pretty small bots are important for getting into tight spaces of manufacturing. There's a bunch of different scenarios where you might need that, but as our primary focus, we're looking at kind of making that airborne technology possible. So that's kind of what we're headed to.
exactly, yeah. So this machine was a fully autonomous, vision-based metal 3D printer that would maneuver around on its own power, its own cognition, and be able to conduct that process fully autonomously. And not only that, in order to meet the performance standard, we designed it to integrate, full-on localized shielding, which is standard in welding, with argon. So we integrated a full pressure vessel into it to get to that performance standard. And not only that, we 3D printed the entire structure. I mean, like the entire structure, the effort was completed in a matter of weeks rather than traditional months. And being able to demonstrate that fairly rapidly and accelerated with the technology transfer program, we think was a major milestone. But with that said, ultimately, this approach on the ground, we knew ultimately this would need to move into the air. So the next step would be what we're calling Stinger, a fully autonomous a fully autonomous metal 3D printer on an airborne, basis. And ultimately, that's important because you want to crack the verticality aspect and eventually offer industries like aerospace, like energy, a platform to 3D print very, very large structural components. And not only that, we want to crack the problem of accessibility to this field, especially in terms of the implementation.
Right. So the cool idea that we kind of have is to offer our hardware as a service in a sense, because of all the frustrations we've heard, it pretty much all comes back to implementation. Quality, yeah, it's mainly good for the smaller parts, but the implementation is just such a turnoff for most people. And so if we are able to offer our hardware as a service, then that whole implementation issue kind of goes out the door. Then along with that, the thing I get excited about as a supply chain guy is the ability to manufacture on site will really change a lot of things. I'm sure, a lot of you watching this right now have seen how wind turbines have to be transported across the country. I mean, they have their own specialized vehicles to stretch around lights to be able to do that. It's just ridiculous. And I'm sure you've seen videos of jet shuttles going down the street, all these cars are backed up. Point is, for a lot of your massive metal structures, the logistics of it are just a nightmare. And especially now in our kind of current world state of supply chain with all the cargo bays just sitting out there and shipping containers. So to be able to say, hey, we could come and manufacture straight up the ground on site, no hassle, that would really open up a lot of doors as far as economic efficiency and just better timeline. Because sometimes for projects such as A320 Airbus, the just kind of a lot of the manufacturing of it takes so long just because of the fact it takes parts so long to get there. So by cutting down on all those things, you are automatically opening the door for a lot more economic growth globally, but especially just company to company. So something that I think is really exciting, and this technology allows that vision to kind of accelerate as well.
Of course. So yeah, at this stage, we are fairly mature through R&D and development of the process. The next step would be a practical demonstration. And we're going to be doing that at aerospace scale and aerospace parts.
Right.
Yeah.
So as far as our needs as entrepreneurs, really we're at the investment stage, right? Because we have all of our designs ready, everything is set and ready to go, but now it's just the capital behind really putting this thing to the test and proving out that process first. That's the thing we're focusing on if we're talking milestones, right? So from that point on, through our first milestone, getting the process, that's going to open the door for us to be able to go into things like the drone. It'll, the capital will be there to be able to do that. So as far as immediate needs, we're looking for partners to help us get through that first milestone, whether that is investors or partners of support. Anything in that nature is exactly what we're here for in this point in time.
Absolutely. So yeah, we're definitely looking to speak with anyone and everyone, and yeah, I think it's a good time for a Q&A.
Thank you, Christian and Austin. Thanks for a great presentation and really cool product that you're creating. So we have a couple questions in the chat box. One, is there any concern regarding efficiency from a weight perspective or having to reload additives? Or will the swarm be large enough for there to be a constant rotation?
Right, yeah. So the approach we're taking with that is really strength in numbers. So rather than the approach of getting a drone which is very high endurance, stay in the air as long as possible, put down as much material as possible, we're planning for a pretty consistent rotation where it's up in the air, it comes back to restock, and it's instantaneously replaced by another.
Right. So the idea that we have now is that we'll have 6 drones deployed at a time, making up a swarm, maybe made up of 6. Now, depending on the job, it could be a smaller part or a bigger part. So maybe that number in the swarm will change. But the idea is that 6 drones will be deployed as a swarm, and then maybe you have 6 more on standby. And then so all kind of working together in a loop, simultaneously replacing one another to keep that job going is kind of our approach to that problem specifically.
Okay, thanks. So that leads into, I think, the next question, which is, what are you projecting the drone work time to be before either running out of additive or needing recharging?
We're expecting about 4 to 5 minutes in the air. And yeah, just rapidly restock, cycle them through, and operate, swarm 24/7 if need be.
Right. And the reason why we didn't really go the full drone endurance route is because you're going to have to just take so much weight in the air if you want to have that level of battery or energy. So it just gets too heavy. And especially when you talk about FAA compliance, those things both kind of get difficult. So the approach of just rapid, a lot of drones, strength in numbers to us was more attractive as far as how we're going to approach this particular problem.
Right. And that even works to simplify the design a lot, where you don't need to, pack in as much weight as powerful motors. It simplifies the whole thing, that approach.
Okay, and how about external like atmospheric factors like wind, humidity? How does that affect the operation of, I guess, of Stinger when you get to that point?
Right, yeah. The system is designed to be fairly fault tolerant up to the point where you could lose 3 out of 8 motors and still stay in the air. And from the perspective of, inclement weather, uh, even just wind, the motors are they're fairly durable from a perspective that you could throw a lot at it and it will not, budge.
Right, and obviously in extreme environments, that's going to take its own set of R&D and testing at that point, at that milestone once we get there. But from more basic standpoints about like cold weather versus warm weather, rain, moisture, things like that, we're fairly sure that the testing we've done and kind of the materials we've used will kind of make a fully encompassed drone that's going to still stay within that realm of amazing quality that a lot of the companies we would go to need. So,
Of course.
Okay. A few more technical questions. What have you been able to print thus far with your ground prototype? What kind of designs?
Yeah, we were designing the ground prototype, the crawler, from the perspective of proving out the fundamental question that the energy problem could be solved. We really didn't look to print, extremely high quality parts with that. Just, solve the foundational questions.
right. And from that, when we created the crawler, we were still using a different printing process at the time. And so the parts that we printed weren't what you would say, amazing industrial level, large scale parts. And I think that was held back by the type of printer we were using at the time. Since that point in developing our new printing process, that's something that we think will be carried out much better and allow for that industrial grade printing and large scale, obviously, as we've talked about.
Of course, the rapid induction process is significantly more powerful than anything we tried with crawler.
Okay. Do you know yet about energy efficiency comparisons between ground-based and airborne? How do they compare?
Yeah, so ground-based, obviously you have that element of, horizontal. You're not limited in the size you could print, on the ground, but verticality is what really matters. So one of the major lessons we have kind of carried over from that prototype effort was the approach to production. And we think that, yeah, you want to be able to 3D print the structure of the drone ultimately. And yeah, we're looking at a lot of commercial off the shelf, technologies to facilitate that using composites. But yeah, in terms of performance, um, obviously stability is the main thing that comes to mind. And yeah, we're looking at some very interesting things in stability that you can do with a drone that you actually can't do with something on the ground. And I think we'll have some very interesting things to share with that pretty soon.
Okay. Um, how do you mitigate failed prints?
Right, yeah. So obviously the first thing that comes to mind with that is you want that in process, you know, verification of what's coming out of the nozzle. And the tech transfer program was very great in that we were able to integrate a lot of that technology and mitigate, mistakes as they're happening. That is not foolproof. There are still, ultimately going to be mistakes made. And at that point, you really you really can do some new things that you couldn't previously do, where technically this is not a layered process like a traditional 3D printer. We're not, putting material down layer by layer. We're injecting fluid into existing material to build up a structure. So what that does ultimately is it reduces a lot of the typical failures you'd experience with, thermal gradients that arise in traditional processes. It's just a lot less, heat, variance going on. So that works to solve some of that problem.
Okay, as I understand it, based on your answer, some of that technology that you are utilizing from NASA allows you to monitor and autocorrect errors in printing. Is that correct?
Right, yeah.
Okay. There are a number of more technical questions in here. I'm afraid I'm not going to get to all of them. I wanted to shift gears just a moment and talk about your experiences as an entrepreneur and raising funds and how you got to the point where you were able to fund prototype development. What were some challenges and how did you all, raise money to get to this point?
Yeah, I'd say we've been very fortunate to have been, in a community and have resources like, the NASA relationship and, even just, local. And yeah, we've been very capital efficient so far. We raised about 100,000 friends and family, and we, yeah, we've not had to take on very much external capital up until this point, and wanted to wait until we were, very high conviction, very confident in the process before we did that. And
Right. So, kind of to this point, after friends and family, everything else has been self-funded. I guess that's part of friends and family as well. Self-funded, and also there's just a few, friends who are kind of smaller angel investors that have helped time to time. So, as far as bigger, firms, venture capital firms of that nature, that's something we've started to go after now and recently in the past month or two, and really kicking that off this month, for example. So, right, to this point, it's been pretty small expense. It's been more about how do we make things less expensive than how do we raise more money, if that makes sense. So, on our crawler drone, it was more about finding ways to cut costs and make things more efficient before we went and tried to get more money from other people. So, and as far as struggles as entrepreneurs, obviously, I think I can speak for both of us saying as young entrepreneurs, it's difficult sometimes because you're always fighting the uphill battle. I didn't work 10 years in Boeing or have that crazy, background. I don't have an MBA from Stanford, things like that. But so, in that nature, it is difficult fighting that uphill battle with a new technology being young, fresh faces. But that also, I think, in my opinion, makes it more exciting, right? Because then you look at, do we have the mold? And can we kind of fill in those shoes that are going to serve longevity in a great company for the next 30 years if all goes well. So I think that's all part of the journey. It's exciting, but it definitely has its challenges. um, but the good thing along with that is that in Tempe there's now a bigger startup community growing where we have other people to go to, whether for more connections or just for people to kind of work with. So that part has been nice in the past couple months. That's been developing.
of course,
So on that note, and um, being from the entrepreneur's perspective, how did you all come together, form a founding team, meet each other, decide this is something that you all want to do together? Um, what was involved in that?
yeah. So we both met, at our university, and when this idea was in its earliest stages, the question I was faced with was, how do I find world-class experts in, things like artificial intelligence or material science. And ultimately, what I ended up doing, I believe, was I went to our school library, our engineering library, and left notes in the graduate level textbooks for AI, and I found our chief AI expert from that approach, and then he introduced me to Austin, and yeah, it's been a very
Right. So it's kind of funny how things find you sometimes in life. Like I wasn't going into university thinking, "Oh, this is great. I'm going to go into swarm manufacturing and AI and that kind of thing." But all of a sudden, walking on campus, I get introduced to Christian. We start talking, and things kind of blossom from there. Um, and we kind of developed this idea that to me was just so exciting that I didn't care if the money was going to come now or in 10 years. I just thought it was so exciting, and I wanted to be a part of this level of project. So to me, it kind of immediately jumped out as this is great. And obviously, not being specifically looking at, hey, I'm going to go do swarm manufacturing. For me, it's just exciting. I found really quick that I love entrepreneurial work. I love working in a team and finding just how to make cool things happen. That to me was a lot cooler than investment banking or things of that nature. And part of that, which I won't really go into, but part of that's just because of growing up, the passions I had were all kind of like being an entrepreneur without being an entrepreneur. So I was a classical musician for 12 years, which in itself is pretty much being an entrepreneur. And there's just a lot of things in my life that led me to this point where it was easy for me to kind of transition into this world and fall in love with it. So
yeah, it kind of, rather than us seeking out a problem, the problem kind of found us in a way. And yeah, we just how do I say this? We experienced the problem and did not see any, practical way that it was being solved. And we just would have loved to have that tool there to use it when we were, working in this stuff.
Great, thanks, you guys. Kind of last question around that in that space is, you had mentioned before that you had heard a number of frustrations around implementation. That was the biggest thing that you were hearing. How did you hear that? What did you do for customer discovery? How did you, find out that it's a real problem that you can solve?
right. So there's actually a lot of different angles to that we took. The first one was just direct. It's finding out, okay, can we go meet with the CEO of this company and just talk to them? Then there was kind of, direct but mass produced, finding out how to send out surveys to people in the industry and see their thoughts on this technology and also frustrations they have with the current technology. And then finally, for me, what I did was I just met with some smaller founders through our university, some startups here in Tempe, and asked if they are familiar with 3D printing, if they used it. And a lot of them had, and that's kind of how those frustrations came about. And it was just funny how consistent the answer was across all of these approaches. But specifically, we went and met with Jim Cantrell, who's co-founder of SpaceX and is here down in Tucson at Phantom Space. And it's funny, we had this meeting with him just to talk about our technology. And he didn't tell us this before, but after he said, before we talked, I really hated 3D printing, and then gave us the whole spiel about how the implementation was terrible, incredibly expensive, and then just getting the heat out of the mess it already was just kind of the cherry on top of like I never want to touch 3D printing again.
Yeah.
So it's just interactions like that where we've just been able to connect with people. Fortunately, that has just given us a good direction to go as far as how we're going to solve problems.
Okay,
Exactly.
great. I'm gonna try to grab one or two more questions before we run out of time. So one, I'll go back to post-processing. Is it required? Things like heat treatment um, with your concept?
Yeah. The de facto standard for most processes of metal 3D printing, especially larger processes, is you have to manufacture the thing, which is its own problem, and then you have to move that into a heat treatment furnace, do all this crazy stuff, sometimes even machine the part, and then once it's been relieved of all that, once that part is achieved, then in many cases you have to repeat it, pick up where you left off. And the post processing thing is really a nightmare in this industry. And the reason for that is, when you introduce lots of thermal, gradients and layered processes, it is not very good for materials science. So yeah, you want to find a way to conduct the process without having to face all of that post-processing nightmare. So yeah, the first thing we've really tackled with that is getting away from a layered process and just injecting fluid into fluid. And from there, yeah, you're dealing with a lot less thermal, residual stresses that really break down the problem and allow you to do it a lot more closer to on location eventually.
Okay, great, thanks. In your business model, you all talked about providing hardware as a service. Are you considering a support role for like tech support and training for those who, acquire the hardware? Is that part of your business model as well?
So we thought about that. I mean, the approaches are, when you're offering something as a service, you can either like dish it out and say, can you kind of deal with it and use it? Or you can dish it out, but like you still operate on site, right? They kind of just order it as a subscription or something like that. And then you still take care of it. And for us, that was more attractive just because, again, implementation. So you wouldn't really be fixing the problem if we offered our swarms to use, and then now they have to figure out how to use it and make it work and implement it themselves. We figured we'll just take care of that altogether. We will offer a service. We won't have to like offer tech support to them specifically. We'll just have our own people for that, if that makes sense.
Right, and that ties right into the implementation problem where, industry recognizes that metal 3D printing is this amazing new innovation in the field, but it is just a nightmare to get up and running with it. And we think a lot of that, yeah, you want to be able to shift the burden of maintenance and compliance and all this crazy stuff off of the customer. So yeah, we're going to maintain our own hardware and operate that as a service.
Okay, great, thanks. If you can raise necessary capital or acquire the partners that you need to help move things forward, what is your projected timeline for creation of Stinger?
Well, obviously the first milestone we need to hit to get there would be demonstrating that the process works and the process is exactly how we've simulated, it will perform. And yeah, for the timeline, we're looking to demonstrate that by the summer of this year. Stinger would be the long-term goal, and I'd anticipate, based on where we have it already, the maturity of the R&D, I'd estimate we could have drones operational within 2 years, I'd say.
Okay, great, thanks. And I am gonna just hit you guys with one more and then we'll wrap it up. Great talk with all of these questions. For the audience, I know I haven't gotten to all of them. I think the contact information for Christian and Austin is down on the screen there as well, to reach out. So in your landscape and in your conversations that you've had and discovering that there really wasn't a solution for these problems, did you come across any potential competitors in the industry of hardware as a service in this
Of course,
space?
yeah. The way we're really looking at it is obviously there are competitors that come to mind, 3D printing massive things, especially aerospace related. Um, Relativity is one that comes to mind very easily. And yeah, we're really approaching it from the perspective of rather than being competitive with firms like that or with SpaceX or Blue Origin, for example, we're really not in the business of building rockets, for example. I think, SpaceX has the best rocket design in existence, and I'd love to help them build more of it. So, yeah, we see ourselves more as like a complement to that, a tool that, they could use. Yeah, I'd say that rather than competitive, we think we're, complementary and we want to help them build more of what they're doing.
Right. As far as direct competitors go, although there are, like Christian said, obviously competitors in the stance of larger parts, we haven't seen anyone going our specific route with our kind of vision. We just have yet to see that. You kind of see bits and pieces of it all in different areas. So you see, like, this is a random example, but there's those companies using drones to do like halftime shows where you have drones working in swarms to make different patterns, right? That's swarm technology. And then you have relativity making large parts, and that's something we're doing. So there's kind of like different pieces all over, but no one has really wrapped them together like we are. And then the other thing is we, as far as we know, are the first using induction as a process of printing. So that has yet to be done, but obviously it will at some point. So hopefully getting there in 2 years, we can be the first to kind of propel this process. So that's what we're excited about. And for everyone else, if you haven't asked questions, you can always email either of us or call. So I know she said that, but just to reaffirm.
Of course.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Christian and Austin. We are out of time for today. So again, the contact information for them is on the chart that's being shown right now. Once again, we really appreciate everyone taking the time to be with us today. We look forward to seeing you maybe at the next startup series. And thanks again to Rosotics. Christian and Austin, just hang on to the line for just a minute here to close out. But thanks so much, everybody, and have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.